Close reading and, sorry, I'll say that again. We're looking at close reading and analysis. So what do we do when we are reading closely and analysing texts? Well, thinking about the author's meaning, or identifying the author's meaning behind the text. We need to look at the finer details of the text and really examine the finer details. It's a bit like getting a magnifying glass and looking for the clues within the text that help us make our inferences and judgments about characters, setting, etc. Analyze and evaluate the author's purpose. Why do we think the author has written something in a certain way or presented a character in a certain way? Understand and empathize with characters' personalities, and use our traditional PEE method with a Z at the end to express your ideas. So point, evidence, explanation, and the Z stands for Zoom. One of the best pieces of advice that I tell all of my students when you are dealing with a close reading analysis type of question is to write a lot about a little. You're not just using evidence, reaming out sentence after sentence. You are focusing on the most specific aspect of the text. Okay, some more hints and tips here. So a little bit of a checklist. And if I could just check that everybody has muted. Thank you. So let's have a look at our checklist here. Read the text slowly. If you have time, read it at least twice. Get the gist of what the text is about. Could you perhaps summarize it in your mind? Circle the words that you aren't sure of and use the context of the passage. Use what's around, what information that you do have within the passage to work out what they may mean. You are not limited. You can reread, you can annotate, underline key vocabulary that really stands out to you. Use the text to answer the questions. Sounds like an obvious one, but sometimes guesswork is involved. If it's guessed, then you need to go back to the text. You need to be 100% sure. So always go back to the text. Gather evidence from the text. And as I said before, talk a lot about a little. Zoom in. Talk amongst yourselves when you're practicing as well in class. Read again to summarize or answer specific questions. We are looking at the gist. We're thinking, what is the main idea? Can you summarize it? Or do you have any questions as well? Digging a little deeper, again, we're thinking, what's the author's purpose? How does the author feel about the subject? Why did the author use particular words and phrases? And when we're pulling it all together, what inferences can we make? How does the author support key points? Okay, could I have one volunteer, please, to read? Maria, please.
In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. Behind the trees, clouds scudded frantically across the sky. Every few moments, the moon ripped through them, creating wraith-like shadows that raced along the ground. The house shook. Wrapping in her quilt, Meg shook. She wasn't usually afraid of the weather. It's not just the weather, she thought. It's the weather on top of everything else. On top of me. On top of Meg Murray doing everything wrong. School. School was all wrong. She'd been dropped down to the lowest section in her grade. The morning, one of her teachers had said crossly, "Really, Meg, I don't understand how a child with parents as brilliant as yours are supposed to become such a poor student. If you don't manage to do a little better, you'll have to stay back in the next year.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a multiple choice question for our first close reading question. What does the fact that Meg's bedroom is in the attic tell us about her as a character? So we're using the information that we've got and we're making an inference here. I'll give you a couple of minutes. We've got some correct answers in the chat there. Okay, we're looking at B and D. She prefers to be alone and she's set apart from the rest of her family. So we know that the attic bedroom, you are set apart. And also I wanted to talk about the figurative language device that we see here, which is pathetic fallacy. Can anybody find evidence of pathetic fallacy in this extract, please? We've got quite a few people with their hands up. Spandan, please.
The trees tossing, lashing, clouds scudded frantically across the sky, the moon ripped through them.
Very, very good. Thank you very much. They are all incidences of pathetic fallacy. Spandan, would you be brave enough to explain how they are pathetic fallacy, or would you like me to do that?
Pathetic fallacy is basically like personification with the weather.
It's very similar. It is. It's reflecting a character's mood or something within the situation with the use of nature, more often than not weather. So we can see that she's feeling very similar as the weather is portrayed. So that's what pathetic fallacy is. Okay, we have another question. It is the same extract. So why is Meg shaking in line 6? She's always scared of bad weather. She had a bad day at school. Her problems are getting too much for her. Her teacher was cross with her, or she did badly in a test. A couple of minutes.
Are you allowed to have 2 answers?
Just one answer for this one. Okay, we've got some good answers coming through. It is indeed C. Her problems are getting too much for her. So we've got it's the weather on top of everything else. So it's not just school, but school was all wrong, but it was everything. Just everything. Sometimes we have those days, don't we? And sometimes it's best just to wrap yourself up in a nice warm quilt. Okay, thank you for everybody who got that correct answer. Well done, guys. We will have a volunteer to read this time, please, Ish.
School. School was all wrong. She'd been dropped down to the lowest section in her grade. That morning, one of her teachers had said crossly, "Really, Meg, I don't understand how a child with parents as brilliant as yours are supposed to be can be such a poor student. If you don't manage to do a little better, you'll have to stay back next year." During lunch, she'd roughhoused a little to try to make herself feel better, and one of the girls said scornfully, "After all, Meg, we aren't junior school kids anymore. Why do you always act like such a baby?"
Thank you. Okay, so we have a question. What has one of her friends criticised her for? Lines 15 to 16. Cheating in a test, causing an argument, being loud and rough, behaving immaturely, being unkind. Give you a couple of minutes. If everyone can ensure that they are on mute, please. Okay, and we have a multitude of people saying D. Yes, we're not junior school kids anymore. Why do you always act like such a baby? There we go. So we can read into it in terms of the gist is don't behave immaturely. Thank you very much, guys. Everybody is switched on this morning. I would like to choose Fadi, please, to read this next passage.
Everyone was asleep. Everybody except Megan, even Charles Wallace, the dumb baby brother, who had an uncle when she was awake and unhappy, and he would come so many nights tiptoeing up the attic stairs to her. Even Charles Wallace was asleep. How could they sleep? All day on the radio there had been hurricane warnings. How could they leave her up in the attic in the rickety brass bed, knowing that the roof might be blown right off the house, and she tossed out into the wild night sky to land who knows where?
Thank you very much. How do the hurricane warnings affect Meg? She thinks it'll scare her family. She's scared of the noise it'll make. She doesn't care at all. She becomes anxious and begins to imagine a ridiculous outcome. She becomes very worried and thinks the house will fall down. Okay, so the answer, the majority of you have said D. You would be correct, yes. So she's so anxious. We know that she's anxious because we've got the repetition here of everybody, even Charles Wallace and Charles Wallace again. How could they sleep? We've got rhetorical questions here as well. So we've got an inner turmoil here. It's an inner monologue going on. We're inside her mind. And so we're inferring that she's really anxious, first of all. And then we've got knowing that the roof might be blown right off the house, and she tossed out in the wild night sky to land who knows where. Well, okay, yes, hurricanes can do some damage. However, the likelihood of that happening, and she's, her parents aren't overly concerned. And so she's imagining all these ridiculous kind of outcomes that perhaps could happen, but are very unlikely to. Well done, guys. Okay. Next reader, please. Could I have Siwan?
Suddenly she remembered that when she had gone to the post office to pick up the mail, she'd heard about a tramp who was supposed to have stolen 12 sheets from Mrs. Buncombe, the constable's wife. They hadn't caught him, and maybe he was heading for the Murray's house right now, isolated on a back road as it was, and this time maybe he'd be after more than sheets. Meg hadn't paid much attention to the talk about the tramp at the time, because the postmistress, with a sugary smile, had asked if she'd heard from her father lately.
Okay, just the one answer. Why does Meg feel that their home may be targeted by a thief? Couple of minutes.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is this one answer or two answers?
One for this one.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I can't read the first word on A.
Fortinbras.
Okay, thank you.
Miss, which one's line 55?
It is, I'm just trying to work it out. It is I believe it is going to be the third line down, but you are using the entire bit of this paragraph. Okay, everybody is saying the answer is B. Yes. Their home is in a secluded place.